Good afternoon, everyone. The time now is 1:38. And I call to order the meeting of the Orange County Sewer District Number 1 Advisory Committee for Wednesday, August 17th, 2022. And first up on our agenda is Bob Gray, Anthony Griffin, Mary Beth Bianconi. And I'm not sure if the county attorney, Mr. Golden, or county senior assistant or county attorney, Mr. Maloney, will be joining us, but let's get started. And can we have it? Please join me for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Kelly, should we do roll call, please?
Here. Benelli? Present. Hany?
Here.
Ellers?
Here.
Hotel? Dewey? Present, one absent.
Thank you. So we're missing Lori Tortel. Did she call in or?
She did. I know she wasn't well yesterday.
Okay. All right, thank you and welcome everyone. And I also want to put on the record that Mayor Neil Dwyer from the Village of Monroe is also in attendance. All right, so the first item 1A is review the summary of the facility plan, including Harriman improvements and regional approaches. And I see a big book there, Mary Beth.
You do.
Over my own chair.
Thank you.
We're going to start a meeting.
Okay. Good throw. Good catches. Easy.
So I think we're done. I think you got it. Did everybody get one?
Sure.
Extras? Okay, yep. There's one. Presents. Okay, so as everyone knows, we've been working for quite some time on the facility plan. And this is the facility plan. It's a big fat thing. People, it may look very familiar. It looks an awful lot like the facility plan from 2016 and the one from 2019. So it's really, this is sort of an evolution. So the smaller document that I handed out is the executive summary of all of this material. It kind of hits the highlights. So what I thought could be helpful is if we go through what's contained in the executive summary, and then we can answer any questions, those kinds of things, if that makes sense to you, Chairman.
Thank you.
So, essentially, and we've talked about this many times here, the county finds itself in a situation where there are a number of factors that are really driving the need to make improvements at the Harriman Wastewater Treatment Plant and with the collection system to the Harriman Wastewater Treatment Plant. The big things are kind of the obvious. We have population growth in the service area of the sewer plant that's always been present since the 70s, but is escalating in recent years in a fairly exponential way, a lot of investment. There's also a lot of, in addition to the residential investment, there has been a lot of commercial investment in the area as well. So there's a demand for additional sewage capacity. In addition to that, in March of 2020, the Department of Environmental Conservation issued a new speedies permit for the wastewater treatment plant. It includes a number of factors that the treatment plant has to meet in terms of the water that's discharged through Ramapo, many of which are capably being met with what we think of as conventional wastewater treatment technologies. But two in particular are not amenable to treatment with standard technologies, and those are total dissolved solids, and then one of the components of that is chlorides. So these two factors are coming into play here with the work of the Orange County Sewer District and this committee in particular with respect to making decisions about what to do for the future. So since 2019, which was the last update to this book, a number of things have occurred. In addition to the speedies permit being issued in March of 2020, in August of 2020, the Orange County Legislature issued a positive declaration under the State Environmental Quality Review Act for an environmental review of improvements to the Harriman wastewater treatment plant. This document and all the work that's here will be encapsulated in that environmental review process. So that's an important step. We also submitted in February of 2021 an application for variance from water quality standards for totally dissolved solids and chloride. We get into a little more detail about why the variance is being sought as we walk through this executive summary. But that variance application is an important aspect of the work that's being done, and it continues to pend as an open application before the Department of Environmental Conservation because it's awaiting some additional information, which we'll talk about in item B on our agenda, the update to the sampling process. And then lastly, and importantly, in light of these two steps, the Orange County Sewer District amended the scope of work that was originally considered for this project to include a number of other factors that have become important and for considerations for the legislature in terms of making decisions. One of them is an evaluation of the collection system. So we have a wastewater treatment plant in Harriman that I think everyone's well aware of. There's a very large, complex network of pipes that deliver the water to that wastewater treatment plant. Those pipes have served the communities extremely well for 50 years. They are reaching the end of their design life. And so we conducted a detailed analysis of the current condition of that system, as well as overlaying these demands for additional service so that we can understand what would need to be done to not only build a larger wastewater treatment plant, but convey that volume of water to it. We've also added some more discussion of what we consider to be decentralized approaches to wastewater treatment. So those would be approaches where wastewater treatment wouldn't be occurring at the Harriman wastewater treatment plant, but would be occurring at other facilities in other areas of the county. And there's some drawbacks and benefits to evaluating that. We'll walk through that. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about how large the plant at Harriman can be made, which I know we've gone over in our last meeting. It can get pretty big. It has a price tag that goes along with that. And then we have some recommendations regarding what we believe is the proper balance of accommodating regulatory requirements and expansion of the capacity of the system. So that's what this document and the executive summary through. So if we move on, and again, a lot of this is nothing new today. You're seeing a summary, but it's all information that we've discussed in the past several months at least. Updated current and projected flows. This little table at the bottom of this page should look very familiar. It is it's the analysis that came as a result of the work with all of the communities that are served by either are within the district or are served by the Harriman wastewater treatment plant through intermunicipal agreements. And essentially, in summary here, today, the wastewater treatment plant at 6 MGD is essentially pretty close to its capacity as it functions today. We have a projection that's adding somewhere around 11 million gallons of additional demand out in the 15 to 20 year timeline from today. So we would take 6, we would add the 11 and get somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 million gallons or more of demand for wastewater. Planning purposes, and because of the types of technologies that have been evaluated, we've been looking at a maximum build out on the site at Harriman of somewhere between 19 and 20 million gallons of water treated. So again, that's not news. It's something that we've gone over in our last couple of meetings. In our last meeting, we also covered the hydraulic analysis of the system. We talked a little bit about how we prepared that analysis and what the summary results were. These big sewers are called interceptors. Other smaller sewers feed into them. It's kind of like a throughway, and there's exits, right? So the interceptor sewers are the backbone of the county sewer system. And all of the water, with very few exceptions, goes through something we call the lower interceptor, which delivers primary wastewater flow to the wastewater treatment plant in Harriman. Those systems were designed for 6 MGD, and they were designed about 50 years ago, and they've served you really well. But right now, those systems are pretty much coming close to their capacity. And when we talk about capacity, and we went over this last time briefly, we evaluate these pipe networks in two ways. One is we look to say, does the water flow freely from its point of origin through the system to the wastewater treatment plant? Or are there times at which there's so much water that it backs up? And again, back to the freeway analysis, if you're trying to get off a busy exit, sometimes you have to sit in the queue for a little while. It's the same concept. From a regulatory perspective, if you were designing a new system, you would be asked to design the system so that there's no what we call surcharges or no backups on the exit ramp. The system today functions with some amount of surcharge. It's not necessarily a problem for us today, but as we think about additional growth, it's going to become an issue that we have to address. In addition to that, when we think about the network pipes, we can't just think about the average day. We talk a lot about 6 million gallons a day or 9 million gallons a day, and those represent our averages. But when we have wet weather events here in our service area, the flows through the pipes go way, way up. We have to design a pipe system that even on a dry day can still accommodate that, rainstorm event. So right now, the system for the 6 MGD average day at the treatment plant is designed for 20 million gallons a day. So that tells you what the jump is. It's pretty, and it sees that. So that's pretty big. So as we think about making the treatment plant bigger, we have to think about making the pipe network bigger to match that. The removal of infiltration and inflow, both in the county sewer district, which I know the county has worked on extensively, and in the satellite community is really important to preserving the value of this capacity that you're considering building. Updated costs for reverse osmosis. And I remember, I think it was October of 2016, I did a presentation for the legislature and I used the term staggering. Now I'm past staggering. I don't know what goes beyond staggering. I still kept staggering in here. Super staggering, I like it. This is a discussion of the updated costs of the treatment of total dissolved solids and chloride of Harriman if it were to be done. This is considering a 9 MGD plant because the current 6 MGD plant, if you're considering an expansion. So we thought we'll make these two things match. Real quick, it would be a reverse osmosis system. While there are other technologies out there, a reverse osmosis system is the one that seems to be the best fit given the circumstances that you have. The reverse osmosis system requires that the water that goes to it is very, very, very clean. So in addition to building a reverse osmosis system, you would also need to build what's called an ultrafiltration system or UF system. And what is conceptualized here, and this was discussed many years ago, would be that a portion of the treated wastewater from the conventional process would be taken off of the discharge. It would be run through this ultrafiltration system, through a reverse osmosis system, and then blended back in with the primary water from the conventional wastewater treatment plant to achieve the regulatory requirement. A couple of facts and figures. The reverse osmosis system works kind of like a filter. If you've ever dealt with one of those, they have a backwash cycle. That backwash in our case is brine because it's removing the chlorides and the total dissolved solids. We estimate that the maximum day generation rate for the 9 million gallon a day plant is about 2.7 million gallons a day would be treated through the system. We would need 5.4 million gallons of storage to hold brine for up to 2 days so that it could be hauled off site by trucks for further treatment. The site that we have does not accommodate this. We would need about, the ROUF system is 230 feet by 80 feet, and we would need probably about 5 acres of land to accommodate that and the 2.7 million gallon storage tanks. That will not fit on the current Harriman site. And here's where we get to the staggering part. We currently estimate that in 2025 dollars, because we're not building it today, we're going to build it sometime in the near future if we ever did. This would cost in capital $116.4 million. The annual electric cost would be around $250,000, and the annual cost to haul brine would be about $25 million in the first year of operation. So that is, as Legislator Benelli said, beyond staggering. And this obviously feeds into the application for variance, to demonstrate that it's so excessively costly, to do something like this.
Just regard to the trucking of the brine. That would create, if I recall correctly, that would be truckloads after truckloads after truckloads coming to Harriman, taking it off site, driving on the small roads and trying to get them to a discharge location.
So, what would be done, because the brine is literally brine, it's like salt water essentially, right? And it will have some water treatment chemicals in it, but otherwise it's relatively clean water. You could imagine, if you're familiar with honey wagons, the trucks that go around and suck out people's septic systems. So it would be a line of those trucks, maybe not daily, because we would intend to build some storage, because we have to build some flexibility in case the hauler can't come. For some reason, they have a breakdown, there's a snowstorm, thing, right? So they would send empty trucks, those trucks would get filled up. I think we were in the range of, I don't remember if it was 30 to 40 trucks a day. Those trucks would get on highway, and right now, the only treatment plants that are anywhere reasonably close that could accommodate this type of, because we have to send it for further treatment. We can't just dump it someplace, it has to be treated by someone else. And then it needs to go into a water body that can absorb these levels of total dissolved solids and chlorides. So we've looked into a number of the facilities that discharge to the ocean. And so right now, the pricing is based on sending this to a facility in New Jersey that we've had on and off conversations with, who said that they could accommodate this type of. But I think you raised an interesting point. There's an environmental benefit to taking total dissolved solids and chlorides out of the environment. There's an environmental detriment to the actual treatment in terms of the energy that's used, unless somehow all that energy comes from green resources, which right now in this location, it would be perhaps some green, but a lot of coal-fired power. And then in addition to that, most of these septic trucks that you see on the road are diesel. So they're using diesel. There's the road, the vehicle miles traveled on the roads, there's wear and tear, there's the additional cost of treatment, and then, discharging it into the ocean. So this is one of those balancings.
Okay, I'm just gonna let Legislator Amo have a word to say here, or a question, and then we'll go back and let you finish the
Sure.
executive.
So you can address it anytime you want, because when you came up with the reverse osmosis system, I think it just refreshed me. Last month, I asked a question that we knew the village of Kittle Palm Tree were exploring the possibility of putting reverse osmosis system in the chicken plant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's been other models thought about, but that one was one.
Mm-hmm.
And if I got my memory, speaking with them is that they were looking for some grant money to kind of get that off the ground. My question, you can answer it later, because I don't know what thinking will we have any play with DEC given that potential? If they can get it, would it then help us if they put a reverse osmosis there for the 3 million gallons a day, or whatever, 300,000 gallons a day? Would that even make a difference? And secondly, if it were to make a difference, is that something that might encourage, enhance the grant process for them to get the money to do it? Answer it whenever you want. I just, as it came into that section, I wanted to bring it up before I forgot about it.
Well, let's talk about it now, because we are all remembering the question. So my understanding is that the wastewater from the chicken processing facility goes to the village of Curious Joel's wastewater treatment plant. It doesn't come to Harriman at this time. So that wastewater treatment plant discharges into a wetland that then feeds into the Ramco. So the Ramco headwaters are in Monroe. Ramco, as we've talked about many times, has a very small drainage basin, so it's got a very limited recharge area. The volume of water, and you just mentioned it, from the chicken brining operation is in the 200,000 to 300,000 gallons of water a day region. The Harriman wastewater treatment plants discharging 5.5 or so. So when we look at what what got us to the point that the Speedies permit for the Harriman wastewater treatment plant has a total dissolved solid and chloride limit on it was that the discharge from the Harriman wastewater treatment plant is above the regulatory standard of 500 and 250, 500 for total dissolved solids and 250 for chloride. So all of that in consideration, it's difficult to know what the net effect of putting reverse osmosis on the brining operation would be on Harriman, because that would have more impact on water quality in the round po than it does on the water that's actually coming into the Harriman wastewater treatment plant. Does that make sense?
No.
Kind of going two different ways. However, if somehow the round po were to be able to recover from its current condition, we talked about this a few months ago, it's currently listed on the 303D list, which is the impaired water bodies list. It's impaired for a number of things, including chloride. It could have some small contributory factor to help recover the water body. So that's possible. On the funding side of things, we always support everyone trying to get as much funding as possible, because at the end of the day, if you think about it, when someone is giving you a grant or they're giving you low cost funding, it's really your money that's been, taken away from you in taxes. So get it back, bring it back to your community. So we certainly support that. I believe the village applied through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and possibly through the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act. We certainly would encourage everyone to consider the application as they can. Certainly environmental benefit is very important in those applications. So.
Just to follow up, just recommend that the Orange County Legislature support that grant process. If it helps in any way, what we're trying to do, should we try to support? Or it's not likely to be significant, don't go down that road. What do you think?
I think obviously it's up to the legislature in terms
You
of
can make a
how you want it, right?
You can make a recommendation, we may have paid attention, but you can.
The reality is, in Orange County, this past grant round, there were dozens of applications that went in by all of your municipalities looking for money. So you may want to do that as a matter of course, just support your municipalities. They're all, I know the Village of Goshen is looking for money. I know everybody's looking for funding, so you may want to do that. As it relates to this, it's difficult to say how much it relates. So I don't know how you handle that from a policy perspective. That's really up to you guys as the elected officials.
Kate?
Yeah, while
Chair?
we're on this, and you and I have had comments and we've discussed this as well. And one of the things that stuck in my mind when we were talking about if the Village of Curious Jewel takes these actions, how substantial does this help us? And I think we don't want to forget that the chicken plant that we're looking at is not the only contributor.
Correct.
There's a lot of other outside factors that have nothing to do with this. So while they may be addressing that, we still have a substantial amount of levels
Right.
just from all of the other things that are part of the plan.
Correct.
And I don't know what the differential there but I think we need to keep that in mind.
That's true. It's true. It's
At least
kind of
a
not
good-
a,
At least it's a good neighbor.
right, it's
Whether
true.
it makes any big difference.
It's
Well,
true.
yes, and when we heard the news, I'm very excited, oh, this is gonna make, but in actuality, does it make that substantial difference?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I recommend that we think about creating a letter of resolution to support every municipality and list each of them in the things so that the grantors can see which ones we're talking about if you understand the impact. They may, if that comes from this committee, we can take it to physical service, I guess, into the floor. And we just do it. If it makes a difference, we should do it.
The grant applications are online and all of them have an ability to submit letters of support. So I know that most municipalities, they'll go to their assembly person, they go to their senator, they, usually, obviously the local board that's doing the work is adopting a resolution in support. A lot of times the communities will go to chambers of commerce or business that's supportive of the IDA, those types of entities. So I think in the world of competing for grants, all of that type of support is helpful.
Okay. I am gonna give legislator Cheney a chance to just comment also.
In the scoring process, what weight is given to those letters?
It's there, if you were to actually look at the score sheet, it's not on there.
Okay.
But so, But it does, you know, obviously, I think the state is thinking when they're in a world of deciding, do I give the money here, do I give the money there? If they know there's a community that welcomes the investment and wants to see the improvements as opposed to a community that's saying, we don't want this, I think that does weigh in some respect. Now, obviously, I mean, our experiences with things like water improvements and things, most people are gonna say, it's a good thing. We may not like having to pay for it, but in general, it's a good thing, so.
Thanks, Mary Beth.
Sure.
Continue, please.
So we talked a couple of different times in the past about options to treat wastewater offsite, so away from the Harriman wastewater treatment plant. And in this document, we looked at two alternatives in particular, and there's a lot of detail in the document regarding these, but the overview would be, one would be looking at the potential to construct a 3 MGD wastewater treatment plant somewhere with a discharge to the Moodna. You know, from a how do we figure out how this would work and perspective, what we looked at is what are the points of the existing sewer collection system where enough wastewater flow together is located in one location, and then for today, and then in the future, when we look at the projections the communities gave us, what communities are projecting enough growth that they could support a 3 MGD plant. And under this scenario, we'd still be targeting a total of 9 million gallons of capacity because Harriman would remain Harriman at 6. So in this case, we looked at capturing the wastewater from the village of South Blooming Grove, the village of Chester, northern portions of Chester, which go to the what's called Pump Station 3A. That's currently right around 600,000 gallons a day. Blooming Grove Pump Station, South Blooming Grove Pump Station is around 340,000 gallons a day. And then when we look at those projections, you're in that 3 million gallon range. This alternative would also capture flows from any future redevelopment of Camp LaGuardia because it's right across the street. This idea would involve finding a roughly 10-acre site that's ideally isolated from residential properties. So we're thinking something industrial commercial, maybe it's formerly used, disused, underinvested land. We did do GIS analysis. There are some parcels that could fit this bill in the general area. And we would be looking at constructing a couple of pump stations, at least one, possibly 2 pump stations and a new force main to get the water to this area. Wastewater treatment plant site would be roughly 10 acres. The plant itself wouldn't take up 10 acres, but you want to have a good buffer around your facility. The current plant, I think we all know, is kind of hemmed in. And so we'd like to, from a planning perspective, try to avoid that. We would be looking at a cost in 2025 of about $151 million to get 3 MGD of capacity on the Moodna. We did do the analysis to determine if discharge to the Moodna would require treatment of total dissolved solids and chlorides. It does not appear that that would be the case based on the analysis and the work we did with the DEC. But you know, there still would be obviously a permitting process to be had. And similarly, we looked at an alternative site where we would direct 9 million gallons of wastewater from essentially the Harriman wastewater treatment plant. Now that may be that we're actually taking water that's going to Harriman and sending it to the Hudson River for treatment, or it may be that it's just we're dealing with the existing pipe network, trying to avoid building new pipe networks. So that's why we're kind of planning this out as from Harriman, because all water goes to Harriman today, to a site on the Hudson. This little description provides the pathway in the actual report. There's a little map that shows how this would work. But essentially, it would be a 36-inch force main that would travel north along Route 32, eventually hit the old railroad line, go up into just to the vicinity of New Windsor. And then from there, there's a couple of options. One would be to find, again, some vacant, you know, perhaps disused commercial or industrial land in, you know, in that area that's kind of town of Newburgh, south of the city of Newburgh, where there's a lot of industrial land. We need about 18 acres for this plant because it is larger. Or the other option is you are very close to the Moodna, and there may be some opportunities. There's some property. Again, we did a big picture analysis just to say, are there lands that could meet these criteria in these areas? So in Cornwall, there are also some properties. This route for the piping was selected because it avoids a lot of sensitive sites, and then it's also relatively gradual in terms of elevation change, which helps us with pump stations. They are expensive in this context. It would be about 15.6 miles of pipe altogether, at least 2 new pump stations, approximately 18 acres of land, and we're looking at this in 2025 dollars costing about $340 million, which is a substantial amount of money. A couple of notes about this to think about. So one is that with the plant on the Moodna, we talked about this a long time ago. Folks will remember we used to have a project that we called the longevity improvement project at the wastewater treatment plant, and that was to address aging infrastructure that's at Harriman that's there, that unless it is replaced because it's being expanded, would still need to be addressed. So the Moodna option would still require investment at Harriman. We didn't change and update all of the pricing to do that. We need to go back and kind of evaluate that again and see, because the staff is constantly making maintenance improvements. So we could evaluate that, but the Moodna project, as we have it listed out here at 151 million, is actually would be more money than that, because we'd still have to make improvements at Harriman to retain that 6 MGD. And we're making the assumption in this case that we would get a variance for TDS and chlorides at Harriman for the 6 million gallon a day plant. So that's one thing to know about this analysis. The other thing is that with both of these choices, while we appears, and we did the analysis to determine if we would have to treat total dissolved solids and chloride to discharge either to the Moodna or the Hudson, and we worked with DEC to do that. The answer was no. Nevertheless, there are still some regulatory hurdles that we would have to overcome. We talked about these long ago, but I'll mention them again. This would be the interbasin transfer of water. So we would be taking water out of one drainage basin and putting it in another drainage basin, sometimes several drainage basins away. That, in a big picture sense, the regulatory agencies try to keep away from interbasin transfers, because there's a chance that you can be essentially dewatering one basin and flooding another one. And I'm using kind of big picture terms here, but that's the idea. And the hydraulic cycle is water goes in a circle and stays in the same geography, and we're talking about transferring it. So that's a regulatory hurdle that would have to be addressed. Note that the existing system that we have, because of all of the water systems, is already an interbasin transfer to some degree. Some of the water is actually coming from the Moodna Basin and being put in the Ramapo. So that's an already existing condition. It's hard to say. We actually, when we do we'll have a lot more information about that when we do the study for the variance, which we're going to talk about next, because we'll have a better idea about how much.
Roughly. I mean, is it 500,000 gallons?
No, it's probably more like a third.
Sure.
The Moodna water sources to the plant versus the Ramapo side water sources to the plant are probably Moodna is probably a third.
Well, the Moodna communities are 44%,
Okay.
and district is 56%.
There you go.
And
So it's
all
almost
the
half and half.
outside satellite communities are considered to be part of the Moodna Basin.
So it's
in the-
probably
They
about,
physically are
Moodna
part,
Basin.
they physically are part of the basin.
They are,
yeah,
they are.
but I think with the exception of Woodbury.
No, Woodbury is also Moodna.
So
So
it's almost half and half. So it's already happening, in other words. So it's not a very strong regulatory argument to say, now we're going to move it to the Hudson, but it's because it's already happening today.
Right.
From the Moodna to the
right.
Ramapo.
There's
So
justification.
it's sort of pick your poison kind of concept, right? The other one is, and I know if Attorney Mahoney was here, he would bring this up, but there's legislation on a federal level that's called anti-backsliding legislation. And in summary, what it says is if you were permitted to conduct an activity under, federal permit, which yours, while you have a speed use permit from the state, because you discharge more than 1 million gallons a day, you're considered an EPA major permit. So it's through the Clean Water Act. You're conducting that activity, you are not generally permitted to find a way sort of around the regulations to avoid conducting some level of compliance. So basically, if we are required to treat for TDS and chloride, and we've now found a clever way to get out of treating for TDS and chloride, anti-backsliding legislation would say, even if we built that plant on the Hudson, technically under that regulation, you would still be required to conduct the same level of treatment. We would not be eliminating the enormous, right?
That's an absolute.
It's not, I mean, we've seen it applied variably over the years, for sure. We've seen cases where it's been applied very strongly. We've seen cases where there's been a lot more latitude. It seems to be very dependent on the situation. So, but those are just issues to think about. So it's not, these are, I guess the point of this discussion is that it's not, just like everything with this, of course, it's very complex. There's a lot of pieces and parts. But we did want to explore these alternatives because we need to do that for due diligence purposes. We know folks are going to ask, and we need to have a way of better understanding and weighing, you as legislators, weighing the pros and cons, the pluses, the minuses, and balancing out these issues to ultimately make a decision about what should be done to provide wastewater treatment in the service area. So our recommendation at this point, and I think we discussed this briefly at our last meeting, is all of the things considered, and I know Anthony and Brock have had very, very detailed technical conversations. This document includes, I think, the evaluation of 5 technologies for upgrading the Harriman wastewater treatment plant. Our recommendation is at this point, given everything that we've learned about the system, to upgrade the Harriman wastewater treatment plant with a sequencing batch reactor technology from its current 6 million gallons a day to 9 million gallons a day. At the same time, secure a variance for the water quality standards for total solids and chloride so that we're not building that ultrafiltration reverse osmosis system to the tune of $1 bazillion. And in addition to that, at the same time, upgrade the lower interceptor to accommodate current and future growth. We projected these costs out again to 2025 because we're considering that secret process will conclude sometime either towards the end of this year or very early next year. Design would consume, permitting and design would consume 2023 and 2024, and the construction would be bid and initiated in 2025 if that was the desire of the legislature. We used 7% annual escalation of 2022 prices. If anyone wants to use 8 or 6 or another number, just let us know. Change it. We spent a lot of time, I think I told you, trying to figure out what the proper escalation was to use. 7 seemed to be reasonable based on all the factors that we could come up with. But if someone wants to see these numbers escalated in a different way, please tell us and we will do that. That being the case, the present cost of these improvements is about $166 million that are recommended. And by the way, these are all-in numbers, so they include soft costs. We guessed at what the cost of acquiring land was. We went and looked at what vacant industrial commercial properties are selling for. We put in legal costs, we put in engineering costs. So these are intended to be all-in costs. So this is the whole thing. And then projected for 2025, we're looking at about $200 million for this. The little picture on the bottom, which I know you guys have seen, is that SBR recommendation. And then the last image, which I know is small, you also have seen this, is the recommendation that we upgrade that lower interceptor. And this would be upgraded to accommodate essentially the 20 million gallon a day delivery to the Harriman wastewater treatment plant for future, if the plant was ever to be built out that large.
Which interceptor do we just have?
The north interceptor.
The north.
Yeah.
It feeds in.
Yeah,
Discharge from the pond.
it's shown on that plan.
So this last map, that would be projected out at the 20 million by
Yeah,
using the modular system of expanding in Harriman,
correct.
with deeper tanks, et cetera, and the trains. And that is that number we haven't estimated out yet, except in our last meeting, I think, and that was
So,
very, very, very staggering number.
so the,
You did the three.
it's in, yep, it's in here.
It is.
So if you go back to the recommendations page.
Yep.
The upgrade, the SBR, which is the top recommended one there, is 9.0 MGD SBR. The projected 2025 cost of upgrading the treatment plant is about 156 million. And then the lower interceptor upgrade, which would be again to accommodate that eventual 20 million gallons a day, is 44 million. We'll say it's 43,940.
Okay, my question was really directed towards the projection growth
Okay.
at 20, at taking it up to that sequential expansion.
Mhm.
And when we got up to 17 to 20 million gallons a day,
Mhm.
here we're talking about 2025 numbers. So is that's the number if we did it to go to 9.
Okay, correct.
So this does not include, these numbers don't include going to 20.
It's a mixed bag, right? So
It
it
would be added
includes
to the-
going to 20 million for the interceptor, the pipe in the ground.
Yeah.
That would be covered. You'd be done, because you're only gonna do that project once.
Okay,
That project is gonna be, it's a 60-inch pipe. We could hold hands, walk through it. It's a big pipe.
Yeah.
So you're only gonna do that project once. So that would be in the ground and done
at this
in
phase.
this phase.
Okay.
Then as growth happens out in the collection system, there's different parts. So for instance, the north interceptor was recently upgraded. So that's one of the inputs into this lower interceptor. That wouldn't have, we did modeling on that. That won't have to be, they did a good job. That won't have to be touched again. That was a good investment. Other points of interconnection as the system grows over the years will have to be addressed. But in this one, we're addressing that spine, right? And then on the treatment plant site, we're recommending that you expand the treatment plant to 9 MGD, which was what back in, I think, 2013 or 14 was the district's recommendation that that's the next increment of expansion. It makes sense relative to what we're seeing for growth. It makes sense from a technology perspective. We priced that as that's the initial project. If at some point in the future you came back and said, let's look at adding more treatment trains, let's look at doing some other things, we would recommend that you price that at that time, simply because you don't know what those costs are going to be. While we could project out, knowing what we know today, what would it be to build a 20 MGD plant in 2025 today? You're not in fact going to build a 20 MGD plant in 2025. So it's kind of becomes an
So that
academic.
comes down the road.
Yeah,
Okay.
because, but important note, I think where you're going is, we are not foreclosing any future opportunities to make this facility larger if you need to.
Legislator Ramo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mentioned before when we talked about the grant money for CARES Jones, I'd thrown on the table, should the legislature think about signing a resolution for all municipalities. I'd like to ask council to help me with that. I think we should put it on the table here and send it to physical services. If they choose not to support it, that's fine. But it seems to me, why is it a problem? From whether it's Goshen or somebody else, if we happen to add just a little bit of leverage or to break a tie or to do something, it doesn't hurt. It might, and should we consider it? Because certainly, even if the CARES Jones plant doesn't get the grant, maybe the building bureau has something, or somebody else has something, and they'll get it, and it may just be that. I agree with Barry, it probably doesn't make a lot of difference, but does it really hurt to try?
I'd
So
like
I'd like
to-
to get a discussion of that. No, it's fine with me. I just want to end it in the air. I want to get an answer.
Yeah, I'd like to just check with council if we would need to go into executive session with that or anything. Discussion.
No, I have a comment that can be made.
Yeah.
Which is, I understand where you're coming from and I'm not opposed to it. However, I think we need to know just for here to recommend this off to physical without knowing what those projects are out there. So I think we need to get the list of what's actually on the list. I also think we need to know, and you may know off the top of your head, where are we in the cycle of this funding? Because we may be, a day late and a dollar short.
Good point.
So I think we need to find out more about that funding, put a package together for review of this committee to pass on to physical. So I think we need more information than we before we move on this.
And obvious question, every great idea degenerates in hard work, who's gonna do
I didn't hear you.
it? Every great idea degenerates in hard work.
Yeah.
Well, as you said, some of the stuff is available on the website.
Yeah, it is. Some of it is. So I think you make a good point. So consolidated funding applications were due back at the end of July. So those have all gone in. They are currently in the process of being evaluated by the agencies that provide the funds. This year, y'all are familiar with the regional councils, which are sort of there's 10 of them across the state, you guys are in the Mid-Hudson. In past, for these infrastructure projects, the regional council could give up to 20 points towards a 100-point score. So 80 points came from the funding agency if it's DEC or whoever it is, and then 20 points was coming from the regional councils. That's where this type of political support really helped a lot, was to get that 20 points. In this year's round for all of the infrastructure projects, they took out that 20 points. They went back, I mean, this is kind of going back in time a little bit. The agencies always had most of the weight with respect to where those funds went, because the DEC knows who best has most of the needs, or the Department of Health or whoever.
The governor.
So this year, it's gone back to not having sort of the political overlay there. So those are CFAs. The Water Infrastructure Improvement Act program is due on September 9th, I believe it is. So that's a program that everyone right now is kind of scrambling around and trying to get into. It's a grant program for wastewater projects. It's up to 25% of project costs to $5 million annually. And for drinking water, it's got a different metric. That's a great program and state funds. So that's kind of the one that's active right now. I think the big challenge will be finding out who's submitting grant applications, because it's done individually by every municipality. So every town, every village, every city has either engaged a consultant or they have their internal staff working to put these things together. And there isn't any one place you can go to find it out. You could poll everyone and say, you mayor, supervisor, are you submitting grant applications? And do it that way. If you wanted them to be specific. On the other hand, you may decide you want to just offer general support, and that you could offer that support to all the municipalities, and then it wouldn't have to be specific for each program. It could be general for infrastructure or something like that.
I think in-house we could have a discussion in different ways of being able to try to get this information.
I mean, that in my mind, that type of resolution is kind of shallow, because it really doesn't point to the benefits of the respective projects. So, we're not able to say that this project is superior to this project, is superior to this project for the following reasons. And so, I think it's maybe more helpful if the local legislators or assembly people, have specific information relative to the project and the benefits of it, and the need to support it, and how it aligns with what the municipality's trying to do. And I don't know that we can really do that.
I mean, I have a few ideas in my head that maybe we can talk about offline. I mean, maybe we utilize the Association of Towns, and we go to your supervisor, who's the president, and say, do you have any idea of what and maybe he sends out something. Let us
More
know if you
detail,
have
right?
this.
More
Yeah.
detail.
So, I think we can, between Betsy and Bob, I think, and all of us, we can kind of put something together to try to find what's actually out there. I mean, I would think that the stuff that's already on the website, now that I'm thinking of it, they've already supplied their application, so we're kind of.
It's after the fact. That's the
too late
challenge.
with that.
There's lists that are published of everything. It's just all after the fact.
So.
And then removing the 20 points kind of says, what impact is this?
Consolidated funding applications, yeah, yes.
So we
Well,
can,
but for the WIA, they're not,
RIA never had that.
yeah.
RIA was
So
always
there's
direct
no
to the
points in
agency,
WIA.
right?
Yeah.
it was always direct to DEC, and EDC kind of oversees it, but the scoring was all done by either Department of Health or Department of Environmental Conservation.
So we can kind of talk about it and try to find out the information that's out there.
And would that have to be done before September 9th?
Well, so the reality of these things is the deliberations continue, generally into the fall. So, it's one of those, what are those financial things? Past success is no indicator of future, right? So, in the past, the way CFAs have worked, they've been due generally in July, the end of July, and they are generally announced or issued the second week or so of December, right before Christmas.
Okay, so we have time.
So the deliberations in the agencies are generally done fairly soon. Usually it's like September, October, and then it goes to the governor's office, and not really sure exactly what happens to it once it gets there, but announcements are made later. And then for the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, this year is a little interesting. The original schedule for that funding, which is state funding, was that the applications would be due in November. They were due in November the prior year, and they were announced in the spring of the following year, because it's all within one state budget cycle, right? There's this not calendar. So they, for reasons that I think took everyone by surprise, moved the deadline up from November, I think it was like right before Thanksgiving, to September 9th, which is a big for grants and for putting together all the paperwork and doing the documentation and resolutions and all of the things you have to do. That's been an enormous hurdle to a lot of the communities.
So the evaluation for the grants will be done in September.
I would think it would be done, yes.
Okay, so what I said, totally out the window.
Yeah.
Have to be
So
sooner than
we
that.
have to start sooner versus later. Right. See what the information we can collect.
I think, my point, Mr. Chairman, was that I'm not lobbying for it. I just think if it could help, let's take, what's the difference? We see so many memorializations come out all the time that probably don't have any weight either. But maybe if this helped one community get something, we have one thankful legislator, we were short. And if you happen to be counting votes, it might be important one day.
So, Pete, you think that's, I could reach out to Michael Sweet for the town's
Yeah,
villages?
let's talk to Betsy after, and we'll come up with a game.
Good,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
because they have a meeting, I
Have
think, at the end of the month too, their group meeting.
There's some other things that we can talk about.
Okay,
So
Okay.
this document is in draft. I have a box of these over here that I'm going to give to Anthony to distribute. I know technical staff will walk through it. We'll probably have another meeting where we'll walk through it. And so eventually, at some point, what happens with this information, if we kind of go back, this documentation is intended to explore a lot of opportunities to improve the Harriman Wastewater Treatment Plant and expand its capacity. That was the original charge. This is called Facility Plan to Increase Wastewater Capacity. So that's what this document's job is. Eventually, assuming the legislature makes a determination that it would like to either improve the plant and add new unit processes or expand the plant, there will be an application for a new discharge permit. This technical information is what will be undergird that regulatory application, though. So that's the job of this, it's a technical document. That said, we also, as I mentioned earlier, are engaged in environmental impact review. A lot of the material that's in here will also become part of the draft environmental impact statement. So the way that document is structured, it has an evaluation of alternatives, all of the alternatives that are presented here. So multiple different treatment technologies at the Harriman site to expand the capacity, multiple different volumes of expansion from 6 to 9 to 16 to 20 will be embodied in the environmental impact statement. The potential to treat total dissolved solids and chloride on site will be discussed in the environmental impact statement. The alternatives to decentralized treatment, so treatment plant on the Moodna, treatment plant on the Hudson, will all be in the environmental impact statement. So that is our next task that we've been working on in the background, is pulling the technical information out of here to become part of the environmental impact statement. at some point. So at the moment, what we're gonna do is we're going forward with the preferred alternative being the one that we've recommended. But that's really not, it's not, and at the end of the day, it's not our call, it's your call. So this group needs to, or the legislature really needs to evaluate, what is the scope of the improvements that you want to be the subject of the environmental impact statement, and then ultimately have a speedies application for upgrading, expanding the Heron wastewater treatment plant. But in the meantime, we have 2 tasks that we're working on, really 3. One is this is a draft. So we'll be working with technical staff to finalize it to whatever level everyone's comfortable with. We're also working on the draft environmental impact statement. And that's the next giant document that we'll have in front of you at some point. And then at the same time, we're continuing to work on the variance application, which is part of the next agenda item.
And so we'll need to, when do we really need to let you know which way the entire legislature wants to go?
So the schedule
We
is
have to
really,
have the final draft facility is what we have here, your work that you worked on, did all that work. Then when do you expect us to have the final environmental impact study?
so we'll have so it's the impact process is interesting. You say you're gonna do an environmental impact statement, you do something called scoping, which creates the table of contents for the document. Then you create a draft, and it's called a draft. It's a draft environmental impact statement, a DEIS. That DEIS then gets noticed to the public when you're ready. And there's hearings, and the public gets to weigh, it gets published on the website, public gets to weigh in. Then after the public has weighed in, all of the responses to comments, requests for additional information, they all get answered. That response becomes the final environmental impact statement, and it's added to the draft. And then, believe it or not, that doesn't end the process. And after the final environmental impact statement is prepared, which is basically a response to comments on the draft, something called a finding statement is written. And the finding statement is a summary of the process, but also lays out, okay, what were the existing conditions? What's the project that's being proposed? What are its potential significant impacts on the environment, and what mitigation measures are offered to reduce or eliminate those negative environmental impacts? So that concludes the seeker process. We've set up a schedule because we understand, we hear from Bob and Anthony and others on a frequent basis how urgent the need is to address this need for additional capacity here in the county. We've set up a schedule where we will have a draft of the draft environmental impact statement to technical staff in September. Again, we're just going to keep working. If you guys change this, that's okay. We need to continue compiling documents to stay kind of aggressive on the schedule. But really, the schedule is really near
It's the timeline we put forward, so we got, we're still kind of on schedule.
We're still on schedule, but it again, the timeline was driven by how quickly can we do this. If you need more time to deliberate, then the timeline can be adjusted to, accommodate that deliberation process.
So we need both the facility plan and the EIS process before the legislature makes a decision relative to accepting the facility plan.
So in the world, there's no linkage between those things. In this process, a linkage between those two things has been created. So it's really, but know that the facility plan is where all the information is coming from for the draft environmental impact statement.
Right.
So they're really very intertwined,
Yeah.
And
then the draft facility plan, it doesn't require you to explain the institutional arrangements and how you're going to fund.
So the draft facility plan does not, it's a technical document. However, I'm glad you brought that up. I know Legislator Benelli and I talked about this. The environmental impact statement does include a segment on what, the big bad word, governance, right? On how does this all work? Who funds it? You're going to create all this excess capacity. How does that work? Who has access to it? How do they have access to it? Those kinds of things. So that's an important part of the environmental impact process. Right now, I will tell you in our draft, it is just, what we did was, if you may remember, a really long time ago. The original version of this document, 2016, we actually had special counsel come and help the county walk through the status of the existing IMAs, some recommendations regarding the things that they saw. So what we did was we cut that section out of the 2016 document and put it in the draft environmental impact statement as a placeholder. But it doesn't come to any conclusions. It's a lot of really good and interesting information regarding what you have, what some structures of governance that are applied by other, Rockland County, other people, maybe things you might want to look at, but it doesn't come to any conclusion. It doesn't say this is how this should go forward. So that's another important part of this discussion that needs to be incorporated, because at the end of the day, despite all the technical things, all the regulatory things and all these other things, this is going to boil down to what's it going to cost me, right? I mean, that's what every wastewater treatment plant project, from the tiny to the big, boils down to. What's this going to cost a taxpayer here, or a taxpayer there, or one over there? Those kinds of things, so.
When are we scheduled to meet again?
Um,
Or when should we meet again? Maybe the
Yeah.
question should be for you instead of Peter.
hold on, Mike, just let's get this done.
There's a question.
So what we had intended to do was, like I said, we were going to, as we always do, continue to work with county technical staff on this document to kind of get it solidified. It's primarily here, right? It would be small changes. I know I went through it last night and I found some little editing things that should be changed, that kind of thing. We'll be working on the draft environmental impact statement. We'll have a draft of the draft for the next meeting of this group, which I'm assuming is sometime probably the Wednesday of September, which is what we've been doing.
Be the 21st of September.
But then I guess the question, given the question that was just asked, is how do you want to go forward discussing and working through the governance issue? Because that's something that everybody, I think, is aware that needs to be addressed, and some work was done on it in 2016, which what I could do, if it's helpful, I can give you all that section
That would be very helpful.
of the 2016 document, just that, so you're not getting the giant doorstop. But you get just that section and recognize, and when you read it, you'll see it's from 2016, because there's a lot of stuff that's not discussed in there because it hadn't happened yet. So we can do that.
The Interceptor upgrade as well?
I'm sorry?
In 16, was the Interceptor upgrade included?
That's a great question. So our original scope was very narrowly focused on adding 3 MGD of capacity to the site. Our scope has since been expanded to working on the Speedies permit, the variance, conducting the hydraulic analysis, those kinds of things. So the original document and even the 2019 version did not include that. So it's only the 2022 version that's included really that big full picture.
So September 21st would be our next meeting. Is that good for everybody, or, does that work in our time frame, or?
Sure. I guess the question is, for September 21st, what would be on our agenda? Is that where are we having maybe we're having a more robust discussion about, is 9 the right size? Should it be 16? Should it be this? Should it be that? Those kinds of decisions. And then, really the governance issue.
If I might suggest, I don't think anybody here, we've all gotten this is something new, we haven't had a chance to really read it, although I have to applaud, I think you did a great job in presenting. This is a lot of information, and you did a good job at presenting it and being very succinct in bottom line what's happening here. So I appreciate that. But I don't know if we have enough time to go through this at this point, but in fairness to the members, I think that they should be able to digest this. And maybe we should have a meeting before the 21st, just to go through this and say, yeah, we can agree to this. I mean, I've had some conversations with Mary Beth, and I'm very grateful for that, so that I have gotten a better understanding and was kind of briefed ahead of time a little bit. Because the governance is a huge issue. But this is a good recommendation. One of the things that I do like about it is that it is being done in phases. And it makes a lot of sense to take the larger interceptor and make it for the longevity of, like, all of the others are going to come about as you see the growth, because even though a tremendous amount of time and meetings have gone up to these projections is what's gonna happen in the communities, reality is another thing. So the fact that we're not addressing all of those in one fell swoop, we're gonna, as time develops, and we see how things, I mean, if we could have foreseen some of the things the way it looks now versus the way it looked 15 years ago, we may not have adjusted it that way.
Yeah.
So I think the plan is good, but I think that we need to have a really in-depth, and maybe we should try to do that before the 21st.
With our committee or with all the legislators?
No, just this group, because
Just-
we're the ones that are gonna recommend it. You have to
Okay.
remember, these are the legislators in this group, along with the chairman of physical services, that are the ones that have to answer to the taxpayers, because this is a special district. And the others will obviously want to do their due diligence as well, but we're the ones that are gonna have to help them
Great
do it.
recommendation.
Yeah, if I could, I agree that it's gonna be good to give us some time to digest this and then get back together, but, I wouldn't wanna do that prior to hearing from the technical review that's being done by
Funny
our
you should say that.
folks.
I was gonna say,
And because there could be important input that may
That's fine by me.
change some things. So they're not getting it until today. I don't know what your time
I'm glad you
schedule
brought it up,
is.
because you're talking about the meeting in September. We have questions ourselves that we need to go through with.
I'm fine waiting to the 21st, but
no,
I
but
don't
I'm-
wanna hold you guys
But
up.
no, maybe we'll have some of those questions and answers and explanations for this the interval meeting that you're talking about. I don't know, that's 2 weeks away, that's not that long time, but, you know, we've been looking at, in the past day, we've been looking at this thing, we have some questions.
Sure.
And,
So
we shouldn't let this process, you know, I think we can do it in parallel,
Okay.
right?
The
So
other,
why don't you work
Which
with
is, I think, what
Peter?
Barry is saying. We should-
Well, I guess what I was saying
I'm
is,
fine with that, but if we were under the
let's stick
gun,
to the 21st
Yeah.
unless we hear from them
then that's.
ahead of
fine.
time that says, okay, you know, we pretty much digested it, and we want to talk to you about the following.
And we need till December.
That's fine by me, I'm just throwing it out there.
so there's some other, so what we, just like when we gave this last time,
Yeah.
the intent is that we'll have another sit down with you guys, walk through your comment, that, so we do that separately from this group, right? So that's gonna happen, right? And we'll have it certainly before the 21st. Another question though, if you were looking at having almost like a workshop meeting, one of the things, and again, I'm kind of an outsider here, but these folks are not the governance people, these are the technical people. So maybe there's some value to scheduling a meeting among yourselves to have a governance discussion. So that they're doing their technical review and you guys on a parallel track are having your governance, because the broad overview of what you're seeing, some things may change, but from a how are you gonna pay for this thing is not, those changes aren't gonna influence this, right? So there may be some value to this group finding an interim time to have that discussion. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Get
very
whatever
much so.
resources, I know, Joe is on vacation this week,
Okay, so that's a very
Um,
good suggestion.
but so that because if our September meeting is a technical meeting, I guess my question is, when are we getting to the governance conversation, which could be later, that will then push our schedule.
Multi-million-dollar question.
Right, that will then push our schedule. So in the meantime, I will send you that section from the 2016 report that talks about, and we call it governance because it's a convenient term. I know some people don't like that word, but it's really, you have to figure out, you're gonna have this resource. How is it going to be paid for? And how is it going to be administered? What is realistic in terms of, you have an existing demand of about 6 million gallons. If one day magically you put another 3 million gallons online, those users to pay for that 3 million gallons don't exist yet. The cost will. So it's thinking your way through that process of, how will that work? Developers may want to pay upfront for some of it. That's wonderful. But they're also, one thing I see with the development community here, they're very, very smart people. And they all have really good pro formas that say to them, okay, I can extend myself in terms of cost of, sort of dirt, right, infrastructure to this point, and then I can sell things and pay that back before I extend myself again. So that's a consideration. We've talked about if the development occurs the way it's intended, the tax base will be enormous. But the challenge is we're going to incur the cost before the tax base exists. So that's the governance discussion that I think, again, technical is very, very important and is going to keep continuing. But I think that conceptual discussion is sort of separate from the technical one, right? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I have to run out to take the call, so if you want to call. So-
Sure. Legislator Raymond.
Yeah, there's a question come back around. Is 3 meetings ago, I asked a question from Joe Mahoney to come and talk to us in executive session about the legal implications of moving slow, fast on this process. And we've never had that. There's always been a reason why we didn't have time to get to it. Seemingly believe we don't want to get to it. But anyway, look,
Excuse me, I can't hear you.
I'm going to say seemingly believe that maybe we really are afraid to get to it. What the risk?
I don't think that's,
I didn't say it was
afraid to
right.
get it to it, but the thing is, Joe Mahoney's on vacation now, and then the schedule has been different, but what exactly is it that, that you want to discuss?
Oh.
Just say that again, all right?
Oh, sure, well, yeah. Well, it came up when they talked about the decision for the legislature to vote on whether or not they want to spend $199 million. And then also they like the technical issues is really concerned that some legislature is going to have, and certainly now the governance. And all of that could find itself in a rather delaying or inactive process because they don't want to go down that way. And every delay that we confront, we deal with the court situation where many years ago, the courts in an agreement said that we had 85% capacity, we would begin to move forward, and we are. Is it fast enough for a court? At some point in time, we were sued because we didn't. What would our answer be?
Well, here's my answer to this, is that we're gonna have a meeting with just the committee, without the technical side. And I'll make sure that Joe Mahoney's here. And then if we need to go into executive session when we meet in a week or two, then that's what we'll do. But I think that as far as the cost goes, that's still been going and developing and that's it. But I agree with you that we need to sit down and talk to it. If we have to go into executive session, we'll do that. But that I don't think that there's any evasiveness.
I didn't say that, no.
No, I know, but you're saying it's dragging and.
Well, it is
things like
right.
that.
I mean, that's factual. It is factual.
Well, it's a big, huge project.
Yeah, but the point I raised on the agenda item is that let's talk about that risk. That's all my question.
Yeah, well,
Maybe they say there's no risk.
Well, I don't know, do you feel that we need technical
No.
in with our discussion on this? No?
Well, if we're talking about costs and how they're distributed, I think they know best to be able to provide.
Okay.
But I just like, if I could, as long as I've got the floor,
Yeah.
just respectfully address what Legislator Amos said, and that is, I think that we made a conscious decision a number of months ago that we're gonna meet monthly. We're gonna make sure that our consultants and our staff is moving forward with this project. And so I think that we did the right thing at that point in time. As a former legislator colleague of mine said, you can sue a ham sandwich if you want to. So to keep us from being avoid being sued, it's in the eye of the person who's taking the action against us. And like I said, I think that we have positioned ourselves by the steps that we've taken in terms of trying to be diligent about this, meeting every month, making sure that our consultants and staff are meeting the schedule that's been set forth. Yeah, I have trouble seeing where we could reasonably be, it could be suggested that we're dragging the feet and not trying to get things.
I understand your point, you know, and I don't know.
And that's not to say that we shouldn't have the discussion you're
That's all.
suggesting with Joe
Sure, I mean, that's my
and
point.
Betsy.
Yeah, and that's my point. I put on, hey, whoever does it, is it, we need to talk about it. So it's, you know, just eyes wide open as we go in. You know, to follow up with your point, you know, I think that, you know, and I've seen a number of cases in court that have gone ways none of us thought it was gonna go, and we didn't know how they were gonna deal with it. And it happens, and whether it's political or not, it happens. You know, and I think what you talked about, and all right, you know, it's sort of, you know, I've always looked like three kinds of ways you evaluate something. You got structure, process, and outcome. Yeah, the structure's there, we got a consultant, we're here, we got a big book. Got a process, we're meeting every week. Outcome, we have no answer yet. We have no answer. This could go on for another 3 years for whatever reason, and a judge could look at that and say, yeah, you know, you tried, but you didn't get the job done.
Right.
Well, I feel we're
And that's
a lot
only- and I
closer
wanted
than
a
3
legal-
years
a
away.
legal
I feel like
opinion.
we're right on the cusp of this, and we're planning these meetings, and I feel we're right on the cusp of it, where I feel that we're at the appropriate time to start talking about how it's gonna be paid for, and that it's moving along.
I'm not disagreeing with him,
But I
so
don't think that it's gonna be 3 more years.
I have no idea. But I want to know the risk, the legal risk. Nobody at this table is a lawyer.
Mhm.
Betsy's here. I mean, I don't know what the legal risk is. Is there a legal risk that we have to look at?
Okay, and
Maybe we can deal with that when we get together to talk about governance.
yeah,
Fine, yeah. I just think we should talk about it, just so we understand it as a legislative group. You know, what do we, you know, if we delay 6 months or somebody tables it or somebody uses it.
I agree with
what's
you.
gonna happen, you
I
know?
agree with you.
We just need to understand what it means. It's a big ticket item. It's gonna scare a lot of people.
Yeah.
Who've never had to deal with a piece that large. And we may find ourselves in that kind of a process. I just wanted to make sure that.
Okay, so we will definitely do that sooner, kind of like within the next month or
Gotcha.
within the next month.
Fine.
And we'll get Joe Mahoney
Before this.
For the 21st. Good,
okay,
on the record.
on the record. All right, great. Let's move to our next item, okay? I think we're wrapped up here. Mary Beth?
Yep, so sampling, this will be quick.
Yes, just for the record, let me say that item number 1B is an update on the sampling process. And that's for the outside water companies and different sampling.
Okay, so this is quick. So folks remember we had lots and lots of discussions about doing sampling in response to requests for information as part of the variance application. We are actually sampling finally, after a lot of time, lots and lots of effort. You'll remember, we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 samples altogether that are being analyzed. This is raw water sampling from the drinking water suppliers, and this kind of gets back to that discussion about what are the sources of TDS and chloride. We have a lot of documentary information that says that the geology here results in hard water. If you live here and you use well water, you know it's hard water. And TDS and chloride are kind of in that hard water mix. So this is the sampling and variance response schedule. So you'll see that August 22nd, 23rd is the sampling, first days of sampling and training of the staff to do sampling. Tracy is leading that, working with Anthony and the staff here. Lab analysis after the samples are all taken, and sampling is expected to last for a couple of weeks, take about 30 days to receive after the last sample is submitted. We then have to get all that information. It will be a whole lot of reports with lots and lots of numbers on it. And those numbers have to be taken from being numbers to being something useful. What does the information mean? We're targeting getting a report on sampling to technical staff here at the county in the end of in October, so that it can be reviewed, as Bob and Anthony have pointed out. And then, once we have that information, then this is the last piece of information to, I don't remember whose point it was about, you know, at one point we had a meeting and someone says, what do you need to keep moving forward? So right now, to respond to the notice of incomplete application, we need sampling information. And then the last two pieces of information that we need are review and response by both the Orange County and Rockland County Departments of Health regarding the potential health risks associated with the presence of TDS and chloride in the Ramco. So once we have the documentation to share with them so that they can see what is being talked about, discussed, then we'll be working with them to obtain that documentation. When we have that from them, which we're anticipating to be in November, then we will compile everything together into a response back to the DEC. Again, we reviewed technically, and I think we had talked about this before, because this is a permit application that the legislature approved doing, responding to the notice of incomplete application isn't something that requires another legislative act. It's a technical discussion. So that's
Great.
Where we are.
Any questions or comments on the variance?
a lot of work to get to this point, so.
Okay. I appreciate this, Mary Beth. And we have more timelines here. What we have timelines?
Well, it's, I think to legislator Amo's point, it's really important that we know what setting expectations so that everybody understands what the process is, understands what the pieces and parts are, why they take time is important.
Thank you. Anybody have any comments? All right, great, Mary Beth, thank you. And now I'd like to go to Bob for item 1C, the sewer meters update.
Okay, I talked with Christine at General Services early this afternoon just to get a latest update. She had changed some of the scope working with Michael's ward from our office and resubmitted that back to legal. So that's, right now it's back with Joe, and I couldn't talk to him today, so that's the best I have. It's in legal right now, and but it's been through once before, so I think these changes are meant to simplify it, I think, so.
Okay,
I'm
so that's,
expecting relatively soon to get it back to General Services and be out to bid.
and then we can send the bids and then, as you
Yeah,
mentioned before, we're gonna do the work ourselves. Yes,
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
It's the status. Sorry, I don't have more, but that's it.
Okay, the next is item 1D, Village of South Blooming Grove and Chester Improvement Project. Katie, we've been trying to get that group together. And the emails have been going back and forth with the Chester and South Blooming Grove. And it looks like we have a meeting. It looks like everybody's lined up where they can make it at 2 o'clock on Monday.
Yeah.
So that's to go over our new test that was done, demonstration over in the Village of South Blooming Grove, right? And that we'll be going over all of that and things and costs.
In the schedule.
In the schedule, okay?
Yeah.
Is that, did I get it right?
He did.
Because I know the big variable was
I
the
had
date.
one concern, but I was wrong. I thought physical services was at 1:30. It's at 3:30, so I should be good.
Which one was that, Bob?
Well, I have to be at, I have an item on the physical services
Oh.
agenda
Oh.
on Monday
Okay,
that I don't want to miss. So
yeah.
I can do
The
both.
Physical
should-
services is
I haven't seen
3:30.
the agenda yet, but I should have. I think the
3:30.
port service improvements.
So I'm gonna say that one.
Oh, well, then maybe I don't have something.
I'm not sure if that would make its way
I'm
through.
pretty sure we did a request.
So you might want to check.
Yeah.
And see, but the document we have so far is not.
I'm glad I brought it up.
Yeah.
Regardless, I'll be at the annual meeting.
Okay, great. All right, right now I come to the end of our agenda. And unless anybody has anything else, I'll take a motion to adjourn. And the next meeting will be September 21st at 1:30 in this room. And then we'll work together to get a meeting together with just the board members. Okay, and we'll be in touch with that. So I'll take a motion. One Ellis. Second,
Second.
Larry Cheney. Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Now you can relax, Peter. You're gonna turn us off.